everyone, and welcome to the Veterinary Business Podcast, your ultimate resource for developing a successful veterinary practice and career. I'm Dr. Peter Weinstein, one of the co-hosts of the Veterinary Business Podcast. On this podcast, we bring you insights and expertise from industry-leading doctors, experts, and thought leaders. We have all of them wrapped up into one today. We cover a wide range of topics, including practice management, marketing strategies, leadership development, HR best practices, and much more. Whether you're a practicing veterinarian, a practice owner, practice manager, or a student studying to be a veterinarian, this podcast is tailored to help you navigate the unique challenges and opportunities in the business of veterinary medicine. Every listener of this podcast is welcome to visit the website at www.veterinarybusinessinstitute.com for additional resources and tools to support your growth. And remember, you can subscribe to our podcast on all of the major platforms, iTunes, Spotify, etc. So today, I am excited to bring an interesting leading doctor, expert, and thought leader on the clinical side to talk a little business. Now, you might wonder what a veterinary neurologist, veterinary neurosurgeon knows about business. The business he knows about is the spinal cord and the brain and all of those different things. But I have a true outlier, a unicorn. He's been on the podcast before because he thinks differently, which is really novel in veterinary medicine, to get people who think differently. And so our topic today is a new look, maybe a futuristic look at veterinary neurology. And I'm here with my good friend, Dr. Fred Wininger, wearing his St. Louis Cardinals cap.
That's right.
And thank you, Fred, for joining us. It's always great to see you.
I'm excited to be here. I really enjoyed the podcast last time, and I don't know that those accolades are a little generous, but I appreciate it. Thank you.
So those people who didn't capture part one, which was in December, can you give us the 35,000-foot view of Dr. Fred from where you were crawling around to where you are now?
Sure. So like many, I've made my trips around the country for training. So I started in the Northeast and went to veterinary school at the University of Pennsylvania. And then I went to a more rural area at University of Georgia in Athens, Georgia, which is gorgeous. Had a great internship. And then went into veterinary neurology, doing a residency in Washington State University with Rod Bagley, which was a really kind of nice mix of medicine and surgery. And I finished my residency in 2008, thinking I, like many of my colleagues, would go into private specialty practice. But you remember what happened in 2008, right, Peter? Things changed a little bit. So my opportunities changed, and I found myself in academia at the University of Missouri. And that was a very rewarding experience because I got that whole opportunity of teaching, research, and education. And while there, I was part of the comparative neurology program, where we did a lot of fascinating work. At the time, translational medicine was the big buzzword, where we found analogous diseases for humans and animals and tried to treat the humans through working on the affected patients. And we worked on some really interesting neurodegenerative disorders, curing some of them in dogs and children with gene therapy. But the private practice bug got me, and I moved over to St. Louis, where I often like to say I was the best neurologist that they ever had, because I was the only neurologist that they had ever had, and practiced there for 6 years. Great experience, really high volume. Proud to start a hybrid residency program where we shared training of house officers, and then moved to Charlotte 5 years ago, where I practiced privately here at a really great locally owned specialty clinic. But we'll talk about what comes next for me when you have time.
So you probably could wear like 6 different baseball caps, couldn't you?
I think so. Yeah, I'm proud to say I'm a Cardinals fan, but yes, I have a couple different locations, and I like to also think that my college mascots improved as I went from a Colonial and a Quaker to a Bulldog and a Cougar. So
Absolutely.
yeah,
Absolutely. And it's funny because we were on the pre-call, Fred and I were talking about a cougar and disease in cougars because of a mountain lion that we're dealing with locally. But okay, I want to start with the fact that since you've been a professional student until recently, we've got lots of changes on the educational front from that standpoint. We're seeing a significant decrease in the number of veterinary students seeking to go on to post-secondary education. You know, there are more people are still doing internships, but there are not quite as many doing residencies, and that can be concerning if we're looking at the next generation of specialists. It wasn't that long ago that 50% of the graduating students did some level of post-secondary education. It's down below 40%. Do you have concerns about the next generation of Dr. Freds and where they're going to come from?
Very much so. We saw a huge decline in the number of residency applicants this past year. And that's interesting because not only are we seeing a decline in the number of applicants, but we're seeing an increase in the number of opportunities. That used to always be the challenge, is very much a supply and demand issue. And I think the big question that we've been asking ourselves is why. I'd love to get your thoughts on it, Peter. But when I do ping my young colleagues and ask them what prevents them from wanting to go into it, the answers are all over the map. Some of it is the amount of training intimidates them. They don't like the idea of having to do essentially the equivalent of veterinary school years, 1 year of internship, 3 years of residency. It's daunting to them. And many of them feel like they're not great candidates for specialty medicine. Certainly, as our field and our profession grows, we are challenged when we train our students about breadth versus depth. In other words, when the profession was smaller, you could become an expert in many different disciplines just from your time in veterinary school. But now, as the profession grows and the litany of minutia and things that you need to know to be a competent veterinarian gets larger, students are less and less feeling like they understand or have the capacity to become these very specialized veterinarians. Another challenge is, I think, something we can talk about a little later, is inspiration. As the number of veterinarians starts to dwindle in academia, the inspiring variables, the mentors, the role models that made you want to go into specialty medicine in the first place also starts to diminish. I often tell people I found myself on a dental rotation when I was in veterinary school, and I thought to myself, what am I doing on this rotation? I don't want to be a dentist. But then I had such an inspiring professor guiding me that by the end of it, I seriously considered if that could be the specialty for me. But I think the other thing that is limiting is the barrier to entry. You know, young veterinarians have huge financial debts, and they want to start making money. They want to start making money now, as opposed to going into advanced training where not only are they not making money, but they're scrounging to survive on the offerings, the financial offerings that you get in internship and residency, which are often way below what we would consider standard levels of living. And that's also sad because if you think about it, not only does it limit the average veterinary student, but when you think about students that come from lesser economic or financially stable backgrounds, it's a barrier to entry. And I think that there can be a little bit of limitations for those less privileged.
I think those are all outstanding concerns. Before I teach the business and finance class at Western, so I'm a wannabe academic, or trying to be an academic. And I asked the vet students before we start class, and this is at the start of the third year, do you want to be a hospital owner? If not, what do you want to be? And basically a third of the class is interested in hospital ownership. A third of the class is interested in post-secondary education, and a third is sitting on the fence. And many of them just will be happy being an associate, and that's fine. I think that's not a bad breakdown when it comes down to it, except when you're talking about filling a funnel that has a need, and especially a funnel whose opening right now is really wide because many boarded specialists are baby boomers and older and getting ready to hang up their stethoscope and their knee reflex thing, hammer, etc. So I think that the interesting statement that you made that I never thought of was we are losing the next generation of inspirations, the guiding lights, the Steve Ettingers, the Bonaguras, the Bojrabs, the Kirks, all of the people who wrote the classic books that we lugged around at 40 pounds. And if without that Pied Piper, for lack of a better tone, we really don't have that. Now, some of the veterinary schools do have faculty members that basically say you really do need to do an internship and residency, and they advocate strongly for it. Some of it is because they don't feel the veterinary students maybe are being prepared for life after veterinary school in veterinary school. Others are because they've never done anything else but teach and be board certified. So I think that inspiration aspect of things, that bothers me, because if we lose the mentors, that doesn't bode well for the future of the profession in general.
Yeah. If you think about well, it was interesting that you said a third of the class was interested in specialty medicine. Now, granted, I graduated from veterinary school a long time ago. Most of my classmates had no interest in specialty medicine because they had no exposure to it. The average veterinary student goes in with the exposure that they had of the primary care veterinarian that took care of their dog or cat when they were children. So how does one even know that specialty medicine exists? In general, it's going to be because of your exposure in veterinary school, or if you were fortunate like me, you took a year off between undergrad and going into vet school and you worked at a specialty clinic and you got to see all the interesting things that you could do after advanced training. But I think the other source of inspiration tends to be nowadays for young people, social media. They see a lot of veterinary influencers that they emulate, that they want to follow. And I know there's been a relatively large push from that community suggesting that you should do an internship if you want to, you should do a residency if you want to, but you can be a great veterinarian in its absence. And I think that is something that could be playing a major role.
So maybe we need to have Dr. Fred become more of an influencer. I know Ashley Bourgeois does a lot online from that standpoint. And maybe I just don't follow enough of the boarded people to know who's out there advocating. But that concern from a mentoring standpoint is a big one. I think your discussion on the cost benefit ratio, for lack of a better way to put it, you sacrifice 4 years of potentially earning about $125,000 per year, because that's what the average starting salary was last year. So that's $500,000 to make on average about $50,000 for 4 years, which is $200,000 in over 4 years. So that delta of about $300,000, can you make that up after you complete your board certification, and how long will it take? Honest to God, you could probably make that up in 2 years, depending upon what your specialty is and what your skill sets are and what type of practice you get into. And when I start to see what they're offering for boarded radiologists and neurologists to be in private practice, makes me want to go back to school and not. But I think that barrier to entry is one that is taken into consideration. And I think what was interesting, if I go back, I'd have to do an overlay of 2 graphs, but as salaries went up for starting grads, that's when the interest started to go down. When the salaries were down about 80,000, the delta wasn't so great. But now, because internship salaries really haven't gone up nearly as rapidly as private practice salaries, I think people see that they can make a living and raise a family and all of the different things with a general practice salary. So I think your assessment of the barrier to entry and that cost benefit ratio is a good observation as well.
I think that delta is also far greater when you think about the investment potential of that large a sum of money over the course of 4 years. It'll have a greater impact, though I don't know every veterinarian takes that into full account, but that delta is greater. And like you alluded to, it is very specialty specific and can't necessarily be predicted. I remember a time when internal medicine doctors were coming out of residency and they were taking primary care jobs because it was such a non-lucrative field. And now they're one of the greatest unicorns. So it is specialty specific. And despite the fact that you could be financially minded, I don't know a lot of veterinarians that make a choice about discipline based on the financial outcome. So I do agree with you. It is a choice generally of passion, not of finance.
I can speak at Western more than I can speak of the other schools, but I think because of the distributive model that starts in their third year and they get to see many of these specialty facilities, I think a lot of them may enter that third year with the thought that they want to be a cardiologist or a surgeon or an internist or excuse me, oncologist. And then they may change after they've had that experience, after they talk to them about what it takes. And what I haven't done is a post third year survey or even a fourth year survey to see what the final outcomes are of those students from that standpoint. The other interesting area is that a lot of students are going into public health and shelter medicine, and we'll talk about that later when we talk a little bit more about access to care and cost of care and things of that nature. So as we see fewer and fewer people getting board certified, and as we look at the fact that there's somewhere between 12 and 15 projected new veterinary colleges, and that many of them will be a distributive model, but we have somewhere between 20 and 40 open positions per veterinary school right now for teaching faculty. Now, you're on faculty at Missouri, correct? Still, correct?
I am, however, I am adjunct, right? So
As am
despite
I. Yeah.
yes, which is a challenging scenario because you have adjunct faculty that can potentially reap the benefits of the academic opportunities, but not have to succumb to some of the downsides. And I perceive that there is a level of resentment from the academicians that are primary because of that.
It's an interesting dilemma because people like yourself and myself are probably those who should teach because we bring real life experiences into a textbook world. And I really do think it also allows you and it allows me to make a living at a higher level than most academicians get because we can generate income outside of the academic realm from an income standpoint. So most faculty do not make as much, most faculty neurologists do not make as much as a private practice neurologist. Correct me if I'm wrong.
By multitudes, by
Right.
multitudes.
So you're making a sacrifice to be an adjunct faculty, but you can make it up by doing private practice. Isn't that a great business model if you think about it from a university standpoint?
I do. I think about why my colleagues coming out of residency or even that have been in private practice for some time would go into academia. There's obvious drivers there, right? There's research opportunities, and more than that, there's time for research opportunities that they wouldn't have in the private sector. If your salary is or your income is not dictated by the number of throughput cases that you have, you're going to get all those chances to write and create, which I think is appealing. I think that teaching the youth, which I'd like to talk more about, is an opportunity that a lot of people go into academia for. I know that was my primary driver when I did, was I want to teach. I think you get to do cutting edge surgeries that you may not get the opportunity to do in private practice. And then there's the quality of life. If you're on, if you're on the floor a couple months a year, then you get the opportunity to not only pursue professional endeavors, but you could make the argument that the academician has less hourly commitments to their job per se than the private practitioner. But like you alluded to, they miss the high volume clinical which is the reason why most people go into advanced care. You'll be hard pressed to find a resident that went into residency because they wanted to do research. Otherwise, they should have just gotten a PhD. So they get to do what they're trained to do. In private practice, the financial gain, like I said, is somewhere between 2 and 5-fold that in academia. It's variable, but it's large. And another variable which is important is the geographic component to it. Not everybody wants to live in Columbia, Missouri. They might want to live in Kansas City more. The opportunity to live close to home in a more metropolitan area is a big variable. So I think the hybrid opportunities are really exciting. But the other thing I wanted to touch on is I think that this could be somewhat controversial or be pushed back on by some of my academic colleagues, but the perception used to be that the best clinicians worked at veterinary schools. And not only the best clinicians, but the best educators worked at veterinary schools. And I think when we saw this large migration of specialists into private practice leaving academia because of all these positive attributes that I spoke to, you also saw that line or that disparity start to change. Now, if I want a experimental procedure to be done on my dog, then I'm going to go to academia where they're working on that. But if I want a routine procedure to be done on my dog, say a TPLO, a knee surgery, who is going to be more capable of that? The three-headed monster professor that spends 3 months on the floor doing those procedures, or the one that's literally doing it 5 times a day, every day, because that's their career? And we spoke about this in our podcast a little bit before, but the more robotic and routine your practice becomes, the more proficient that you are at it. And the evidence is very supportive that morbidity goes down. So I think that there was this fallacious idea that academicians were better clinicians. And I don't think that's true anymore. And I think people have become very attuned to that. And in taking that to the next step, if you have clinicians that are equivalent to or even superior in the private sector, aren't they more capable of educating on the clinical components of our jobs? And the answer is, I'm not sure, but I think that there is something to be said for didactics being separated from clinical technique. And when it comes to clinical technique, you may see superior training in the private sector. And I think that's a shift.
I concur. And I think, we talk about primary care, secondary care, tertiary care. I don't know if there's such a thing as quaternary care, but I think private practice specialty is kind of now moved into the tertiary care, and the university is a higher level. I mean, it's the unicorn care versus the private specialty practice, which is really doing what we used to do in vet school. 2 points that I want to one is going to sequence into the next, but teaching youth. So I got involved teaching while my daughter was in veterinary school. Now, she wasn't at the veterinary school at which I was teaching, but I have been speaking to veterinary students for over 20 years. And the energy, the questions, the genuineness of the students is something that is extremely rewarding. You get some of it when you get in front of a group at a conference, but I must say the students are really challenging because they really want to learn and they want to challenge you. And I enjoy that challenge at this phase in my life. And I really do think that there's a lot of veterinarians who, having sold their practices, aren't sure what to do. I think teaching would be let's teach from reality. Let's teach from experience. Let's give them the tools to be successful, because if you sold your practice, and especially if you sold it at a good number, you were successful. How'd you get there? Tell me your story. That's a class in itself.
Yeah, I hear you. When I was in my training, I had some of the most inspiring educators, both in private practice Someone like Rick Glass was an inspiration to me because I watched how clinically capable he was. And then Mark Kent or Rod Bagley, who were just phenomenal educators from a more theoretical standpoint. And they were able to enthuse students about a discipline that has historically been challenging, neurology. I often, actually, there was a paper that came out recently that suggested that most veterinarians are neurophobic. It is a discipline that scares them off, and I can talk about neurophobia for a while, but that's a whole different podcast. Regardless, I went into academia because I thought to myself, I want to do what those guys did. I want to I want to inspire and teach and get people excited about something that they otherwise weren't excited about the way it was gifted to me. And what I found when I was in veterinary school is I wasn't as talented as them at that. I would get frustrated that I could not get the uninspired inspired with the acumen that they did. And that was part of the impetus for me to leave and go into the private sector to practice, to do the other thing that I was passionate about. And we were talking about social media. So the pandemic came around, and my story was I'd always been on the speaking circuit, but I I just didn't think of myself as a primary educator. And then you had this huge mass of students that all of a sudden were limited in the educational opportunities that they had. And instead of sitting there taking PowerPoint notes, being nervous about passing their examination, they were going looking for alternative routes. And so I started posting things on Instagram. And I one day said, you know what, guys, why don't you meet me tomorrow morning? I'm going to go on Instagram Live and I'm going to go through cage rounds. And I had on that 480 veterinary students from around the world searching for an opportunity to learn. And it grew into something really great. And that's where my passion for unconventional education arose. And so I think that that opportunity is really available to a lot of private practice clinicians. And I think that we need to, one, recognize that the clinical components, the non-didactic components, there's lots of opportunities to share them, and they're in our hands to share them, not just reserved for academia. But I think that in addition to those opportunities for students, we need to rethink how we teach veterinarians post-graduation. Most of the time, when we've learned everything we've learned, and you're going to be as best as you're going to be, and then you're going to go into practice, and then you're just going to do it, right? But a lot of us didn't have exposure to the dentist or the neurologist that was going to make us excited about it when we were in veterinary school. And so how do we supplement that? Well, traditionally, it's been at conferences or webinars where you get these one-off opportunities for education. And I think we need to recognize that continuing medical education is far more than a conference lecture. It is modules and larger concepts of how we reintegrate you into modern medicine, especially as the profession grows.
Yeah, I would concur. And some of the things that the major conferences are doing, and some of the things that Viticus does at the Okendo Center, for example, where you can do some hands-on. Veterinarians are very handsy, for lack of a better way to put it. And so, I remember in surgery, it was see one, do one, teach one. Well, the do one part, you don't learn by sitting there and watching on video. But Fred, I want you to create an entire class in second year neurology in 2.5-minute TikTok sections. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So can you do a neuro exam, a cranial nerve exam TikTok in 2.5 minutes? And can you do a dachshund down in the back exam in 2.5 minutes? Because really that's what how the next generation is learning. It's not learning in 50-minute vomit all over them. It's learning in tapas, small bite-sized pieces.
It's this educational challenge, recognizing that we have this access to knowledge that we never had before. I remember when I graduated from veterinary school, they said, we're not going to teach you everything. We're going to teach you where to find everything. And that was really valuable at the time. But does that really hold true anymore? Because knowing where to find stuff isn't a skill set that the next generation needs to worry about, because access to that knowledge is so great. I think the challenge is now that we have bite-sized access to information, how does that lead to the continuity, to the foundational base by which to draw those tiny pieces and put it into a larger thing, which is why I would push back and say, yeah, those TikToks are great supplements. But if you're building a house, if you're building all the dressings and the finishes on the house without the basement, um, I think I think that's a problem. And I think that it speaks to potentially why people aren't going into specialty medicine, because they don't appreciate that you can build that solid foundation and then have those little pieces on top. And that's part of, when we have the opportunity when I have the opportunity to share with you the model that I'm trying to create, it takes all these things and hopefully integrates them in a way that creates the most competent base level veterinarians, but also an opportunity to grow in whatever direction you want to grow.
So you're absolutely correct. Without a foundation, you don't have a stable house.
Yeah.
And the foundation is really what we should be getting in our veterinary school curriculum. And then, read chapter 3 of Textbook of Small Animal Internal Medicine, which is the physical exam and history, which is probably the foundation of everything that we do. And you go from there. But I want to pivot just a little bit, a term that I don't like to use, but I used it. You talked about financial gain and the difference between university and private practice. And I misheard you at first. And I thought you said play the financial game, because we are playing a financial game right now, and especially in specialty practice, because numbers indicate that about 75% of the specialty practices in ER are owned by national corporations, private equity, venture capital, and which is a trend that we're seeing in human healthcare as well. And it comes with good, bad, and ugly. And there are some concerns, and I think we're starting to see some pushback in the specialty realm to the investor world, which is making everybody a little bit uncomfortable. And I think part of your bigger picture is you rethinking how you want to see specialty practice in the future. So you noted in your introduction that you're working for a privately owned specialty practice in Charlotte. Okay, we are talking a unicorn there. Talk to me about the benefits that you have or perceive working in a privately owned specialty practice versus maybe some of the conversations you've had with colleagues who are working for a corporate owned specialty practice.
I want to give a nod to the specialty practice that I just recently left. It's Charlotte Animal Referral and Emergency. It's owned by 3 women specialists, and they've been committed to keeping it locally owned and passing it on as a legacy. And I think the reason they did it was this belief that as providers, as veterinary providers, we are best able to guide hospital direction, mission, values, as compared to our non-veterinary corporate colleagues. I think it was mostly spawned out of altruism that they went on this mission, out of a perception that corporate is bad, which I think a lot of us have this kind of shoot from the hip feeling that it is. So I've been thinking a lot about what are the advantages of corporate medicine, and there's a number of them. These are business professionals. They have known models that are successful, and we can draw from them, because I think we'd all agree that whether you're a physician or a veterinarian, we are not business trained, and we can take some business classes, but it's not our primary skill set. I think other corporate advantages are that theoretically costs can be cheaper. If you have these large conglomerates that can get large masses of pharmaceuticals or instrumentation, perhaps the price goes down, which could translate to either higher salaries or lower costs for our clients, or both. And I think a lot of us really like the corporate value of, if I open my own practice one day, maybe I have an exit strategy, right? That's another consideration. But I think the big concern, and I hear a lot of my colleagues currently in corporate practice suggesting it's becoming a bigger problem, is that those corporate non-veterinarians that are not producing need to reap profit from these practices. And how much profit they need to reap. Now, we're starting to see it now that as opposed to in the consolidation phase where they're buying all these practices, now we're more in the profitability day-to-day phase, and they're saying, where are we lining our pockets from? They're going to look at things like how many cases you see, what's your staffing ratio, those sorts of things. And I think my colleagues have identified that. I also want to note that some of my colleagues, when I ask them, why do you go into corporate groups? They say, well, the opportunity to not be married to one location is great. And then when I think about practice ownership, I'm scared of the expertise. I'm scared of the stress of being a practice owner. I don't know if I could get funding. I don't like the idea that I have to operate as a provider and as an entrepreneur and as a planner. That's all frightening to them. But at the end of the day, I think that we are starting to see a massive shift of mid-year or mid-career specialists saying, hey, I'm pretty good at this part of the job. I really enjoy it. I think I know what it means to be a functional leader. I think I know what it means to create not only a team, but a business strategy that will be profitable. And if I have a couple extra pieces, maybe I can go off on my own and not necessarily make more money, but provide a service that's more aligned with why I did this in the first place.
So there's a lot to unpack there, but I think what we do know is that specialty medicine, because it's a higher level, comes with a higher fee schedule, higher expectations from clients, higher expectations from investors. And we're in an environment right now in this profession globally that the cost of care is a concern. Now, if I word this question correctly, it's going to open up for you to go where you want to go, which is, how do we merge the huge skill sets that we have as veterinarians and as veterinary specialists and access to care for those who really want it and need it, but can't afford it? How do we build a business model that meets the needs of all stakeholders?
Yeah, that's a big question. I think that this conversation has to be somewhat specialty specific. And I'd like to just kind of lean into neurology a little bit. That's because that's what I know. And I am acutely aware of some of the costs of operating a single specialty neurology clinic now. So, cost of care can be something as different in consultation fees. Should a specialist have a higher consultation fee than a generalist? I think you could make the argument, yes, they've had 4 years more training. They're offering a different level of service or a different type of service that could be considered advanced. Sure. But at the end of the day, consultation fees are a very small fraction of the income for most specialists. Most specialists are garnering their primary financial gain through procedures. And so people ask me all the time, why is an MRI so expensive? Well, consider that an MRI, I can give you some numbers now, an MRI is going to cost on average in the $700,000 to $800,000 range for the equipment. That doesn't sound so bad, right? You could make that up pretty quickly. Well, you might not know that the service cost to keep that MRI operational is $60,000 a year. So you have these huge capital costs, and then to operate those from a staffing percentage, your numbers are going to be significantly higher, not only because the individuals in specialty require or garner higher salaries, but also because the number of different types of support staff that you need to operate those machines are different. So you have higher support staff fees, you have higher technology fees. It is difficult, and we're finally starting to pay that support staff what they're worth as opposed to what we have in the past, which is arguably not enough. So I don't know that specialty medicine is if we have the expectations of that level of care, because clients we now know are treating pets like their own children. There's that study that came out of the AVMA, which suggested that 51% in the post-pandemic of clients consider pets to be equivalent to their children with regards to the level of care they want to provide. I don't know that the cost is going to go down, with the exception of if there's an entity which is taking some of those costs for themselves. And in light of the conversation we had prior, the only component to that cost that I can see that can come down are the consolidators costs and the administrative costs. And so that speaks to smaller practices, single specialty practices, non-consolidated practices where the provider is also the owner, not taking distributions from it, but just wanting to have a successful business where they can do their work.
So talk to me about the vision for the Animal Neurology Center, the one
Thank you.
that allows you to put the St. Louis Cardinals cap back on.
Yeah, I'm pretty excited about it. I'd like to talk to you about a model, or essentially a theory of three pillars that makes us a bit different. So number one, what makes us different is high level of clinical practice. Obviously, we integrate all the other things that every other veterinarian does: compassion and high levels of communication and what might be considered luxury care. But again, we're experienced. The idea that you cannot be offer the best unless you're academia isn't accurate. And I think that some of the clinicians that I revere the most are in private practice, not in academia. So number one is that we have high level clinical practice, and we also pride ourselves on offering what we spoke about last time, which is spectrum of care, different opportunities for different clients, so that they don't feel pigeonholed. When you have that level of clinical practice, that drives education. Students want to come into the center. They want to learn from these clinical experiences, and not just students, but also interns and residents. So we have built an education center onto the business. That's probably the biggest risk I've taken from a financial standpoint. Is I've built more than a hospital. I've built an education center, which can house over 50 veterinarians or veterinary students. So we're aligning ourselves with the universities, and specifically the distributive model ones, where we can be the primary center for their education that is clinical. So they learn their didactic training in the traditional means, and then they get their clinical training with us. And we have to create strict curricula for that. There's no more of the student that just kind of walks on your coattails and hopefully they pick something up. It has to be specific and a core rotation. And we also take that same investment and create seminars for postgraduate veterinarians, with the recognition that they're not ultimately prepared until after they graduate, and they require continued learning, because we all are perpetual students or lifelong learners. And so we're offering seminars, which is a great way to bring more an alternate revenue stream into the hospital while also aligning with our goals. And so we're going to have neuro boot camp for generalists. We're going to have You Can't Spell Neuro Without ER to train all these urgent care veterinarians that we're churning out. And we're going to have some specialty courses for specialists, specifically on neurodiagnostics. So that's pillar number two. And then pillar number three is a relationship with industry. So now that industry sees of practice, which is doing high level of care and has this traffic of all of these students, residents, and veterinarians who are all decision makers, they say, okay, we want to put our best and brightest equipment here. So not only do we get exposure to veterinarians, but we also can develop, optimize, validate, and continue to make the best products specific for veterinarians. It's an easy argument to make. You said veterinarians like to see it, they like to touch, they like to feel. What is going to get a greater return on investment for an MRI vendor? Looking at some images and a booth at a conference, or is it going to be veterinarians that are actually touching the animals that are going into the MRI, clicking the buttons, making decisions about how the MRI is operated, and making decisions about how it's interpreted? So if those are the three pillars, you could see how they support each other. The clinics draw the students in, which draws industry in to create the best technology specific for us, which makes us practice better, which elevates our clinical practice. And you could see this going round and round. And so I think that this is a very sustainable model that I'm excited about. And then you can create a hub and spoke, because my ultimate goal, and I'm sorry, I'm getting a bit verbose here, but obviously I'm excited about it. The ultimate goal is to provide services to underserved areas and give our young torchbearers the opportunity to build their own clinics where they want to be. So we can create a hub and spoke model where we take this and we spread it to smaller, I hate to use the word strip mall specialists, but give specialists an opportunity to take the overhead down so they can provide services in these areas that may not have the financial means to do it. And if we can take the overhead down, we can maintain salaries, we can maintain quality of life while spreading the level of care that we want to provide.
Absolutely. Absolutely. By the way, you can't spell neuro without you.
Oh, I like that. I like that. Oh man, I might have to switch it up now.
No, but I think you have both, because you is students, you are the local veterinarians, you are industry. It's all the yous that come together that will make your facility work. And you have permission to use that line if you want it.
Thank you. I'll give you credit. I'll give you credit.
Okay, lots of things. First of all, what you have just expounded on is really why a lot of veterinarians entered veterinary medicine. You put in that very short synopsis your passion over your profits. Now, yes, you have to pay the bills, and yes, you have to reward yourself as the visionary with a fair and equitable return. But you don't have to answer to anybody else. You don't have to answer to stockholders. So you might, depends on how you put your business model together. But at the same time, knowing you're going to surround yourself with similarly passionate people who will be happy to be rewarded for their passion and not driven by numbers. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, I agree. I saw a post where you were at AVMA, Peter, and you were talking about the success of veterinary practices and how rare it is for them to fail. And I saw another colleague say, yep, I would never want to do that. I don't want the stress of it. I don't want the concerns of it. I want to plug in, I want to do my job, and I want to go home. And I think that there is a space for those veterinarians, maybe more of them. What I love is the opportunity to give them that space and still be able to reach all these other goals that we've been talking about. So it's not for everybody. But the idea that I don't need to be more financially successful. I could even be less financially successful than I currently am. But the idea that I could do that and still educate and still innovate without a loss, and with an opportunity to not only help veterinarians, but when I start losing my way, what I get most excited about is my staff. The other day, my future staff was having a picnic out front of the new building, which is several months away from being operational. And it's because they're so excited about being at a place where that creates a culture and philosophy that gives them job fulfillment. And the chance of helping get them there is a pretty big reward. It doesn't always have to be a financial reward to still do well financially.
Absolutely. You got to fill your heart too.
Yeah.
So I look forward to the ongoing story of Animal Neurology Center on Instagram and other platforms where you can share the route that you're taking. I also, the hub and spoke idea, I saw this very successfully in Canada, where 13 hospitals owned a central facility. So most of them did not have their own surgery suites. They didn't have their own imaging areas. They didn't have their own labs, except for maybe a microscope. And everything was done in a central facility. So their overhead was bare minimum. Examinations, nail trim, whatever it was. You could pull a blood sample. But for the most part, with your overhead being low, your profitability was higher. You could pay your staff more. And if the pet was ill or needed subsequent care, you could arrange for it to go to the central clinic where the services were provided. And with enough referrals coming in, because volume allows you to get better, faster, and cheaper, you keep your business busy. And one of the problems that we have in veterinary medicine, speaking from an economic standpoint, is we pay 100% every day for the rent or mortgage of our building, but they're closed 12 hours out of the day.
Right.
So how do we leverage the remaining 12 hours? Well, you have to make 100% income in 12 hours in a day practice. Well, if your overhead isn't that high because you've got 600 or 800 square feet and you're sharing in a larger facility that is now busy for 12 hours on top of that, everybody benefits. So if I'm envisioning your discussion correctly, you could put in, as you said, shopping center, strip mall, smaller facilities that are used for diagnostic purposes, keeping the cost to access on that level down. And then when it comes down to subsequent care, use the central facility, which by being busier allows for you to enhance economies of scale, efficiencies, et cetera. Am I interpreting that correctly?
That's right. And the challenge of satellite practices on the other extreme is if you strip them down too much that they are not functional for most cases, then not only are they not generating revenue in and of themselves, but more than that, the specialists that are there are going to be unfulfilled. No neurologist is going into a satellite clinic so they can do a neuro exam and then neurolocalize the lesion, identify the problem, and say, okay, now I want you to go somewhere else to get it fixed. But there is a middle ground. Most neurologists want to do routine procedures, back surgeries, neck surgeries, treat epilepsy. Can we create those spokes? Can we create functional facilities where they get to do the things that they want to do and still be profitable? And the answer is yes, because now we're working with industry to identify less expensive MRIs. We're making collaborations with industry so that we could have a central supply of instrumentation that we could ship out to those satellite practices. There are ways of doing the hub and spoke model where you haven't stripped it down to such basics that they're not functional, but at the same time, you've decreased overhead to be valuable to the local clientele and to give those providers and their staff a lot of fulfillment. I don't know if it's going to work. I think it's going to work. I was watching The Bear the other day. If you haven't watched The Bear on Hulu, you must watch it because, and what I took most away from the final episode is she said, we had no idea what we were doing, and that made us invincible. And so I think that this is a real, I think it's a real chance to not only reach those opportunities of giving veterinarians chances that they never had before, and serving communities that never had access to care before and had to drive 4 hours if they were lucky to get to a specialist. But I think it can also take veterinary medicine back to the professionals and away from, not to speak too badly about corporate medicine, but I'd much rather see the success of my colleagues through my profession than people outside the profession reaping the benefits.
I was, as you were talking about the model, In-N-Out Burger came to mind because all they do is make fries, burgers, and shakes, which means you don't have to have fish, chicken, barbecue sauce, McRib, etc. Well, by doing so, you keep your inventory down. Well, inventory is one of the top 3 expenses, which also means you don't have to have somebody who's cooking chicken. You only have to have somebody who's cooking burgers. So you keep your staffing levels down. And so there are ways to make that model work because you're not going to need a spay pack. You're going to need a backpack.
That's right. It's very, for lack of a better word, streamlined.
Yeah.
And one other inherent value to it, Peter, that I forgot to mention is that many neurologists, specialists, they've worked hard at this and they want to not only do they want to do the routine procedures, but if they get the opportunity, they want to learn more advanced procedures, and they're invested in their patients. And so part of that model is to say, neurologist A, I want to see this advanced brain procedure, but I want to learn how to do it, and I want to follow through on my case. They can come to the hub and get that opportunity. So I think it provides a lot of value for the veterinary neurologists working at the satellite practice.
And I think it's a great model from an education standpoint as well. So I just want to wrap things up because we are still talking about an expensive service. I'm sorry, you can't cut a back for the same price that you do a ovariohysterectomy. The skill sets are different. The tools that you need are different, etc. So we're at a point in time, and there's been enough stuff in the newspapers and on television and other resources about access to care, spectrum of care, cost of care. We talked about some of this in our last podcast. Even insurance, however, has become headline news because of things, and it started actually in the UK because many of the hospitals there were being scrutinized by the insurance companies because the cost of care was so high that the premiums couldn't keep up with them and the payouts were being there. So how do we build an insurance model? If we could build an insurance model, how do we build an insurance model that's better? Or are you good with what we've got? And where does insurance fit in this big scheme of things? Because I don't expect veterinary costs to go down to clients because they're not going down to practices.
Yeah, I'm a little stuck on it too. I recognize that an insurance company makes money on ensuring that the premiums, the deductibles, and probably most importantly, the people that don't ever make a claim, that those incomes are greater than what they have going out. And we talked about it a little bit last time. One of the variables that is inherently different to veterinary medicine as compared to human medicine are the type of patients we have. We have literally created patients that will require claims at young ages. I think about the French bulldogs. That is, if you think about the average lifespan of a French bulldog being 5 years old, and it's because they're succumbing to some inherent disease natural to the breed, that's going to bankrupt our business insurance. There's no way they could. So what are they going to do? The options are that they either, one, compensate you less, or two, that they start considering breeds themselves predisposing factors. And I think that's where we're headed, because otherwise there is going to be no insurance company that could be profitable, and they're not doing it for the sake of altruism. So I'm open to your thoughts on it too. I'm very curious about it. When I think about insurance, I think about urgent care needs. I think about the major need for insurance not being for paying for stuff that's too expensive. That's not, to my mind, what insurance is for. To my mind, what insurance is for is providing people with the opportunity for fund support in those urgent scenarios that they'll eventually pay off, but they just don't have access to those financial means when it's necessary. If insurance is looked at as, I want to pay for expensive stuff, but I don't want to pay for it, then I just don't think it's a viable model for our profession.
So I don't know whether you know or not, but I did work in the pet health insurance industry for 2 years. I ran the claims department for, at that point, veterinary pet insurance, now nationwide. So I have a pretty good insight, and the American pet health insurance industry started in Southern California with a colleague by the name of Jack Stevens, who started it in the offices of the Southern California Veterinary Medical Association, of which I was the executive director for 14 years. So I've got an incestuous relationship with pet health insurance. Maybe that's the bad word, but whatever. I think there's a place for it. I think there's still a lot of misunderstanding of what pet health insurance is in the veterinary field, because it is not the same as human health insurance. Pet health insurance is basically auto insurance, homeowners insurance. It's emergency casualty type insurance. You don't really insure your car for an oil change. Now, and I think the pet health insurance companies have identified that wellness is probably not the optimal thing to insure for because those are known expenses. And in many cases, they're not as expensive and not cheap when you look at all the flea and tick and everything else. My dog, who's been on my lap on and off while we've had this conversation, has casualty, emergency, illness, accident illness type policy because, I can afford a rabies shot and flea tick and everything else. But when he needed both his freaking cruciates cut, yeah, I'm not a surgeon. I don't own a hospital. So I had to have them cut by somebody else. I do think there's a place. I still think we have to get better models that are more affordable because the premiums, I mean, Bruce is like $40 a month, which is $500 a year, which is a lot of money for the average consumer. Talking the middle of the bell-shaped curve. The average consumer can't afford the right side of the bell-shaped curve, which is where a lot of back surgeries are. So pet health insurance can help with that. When you have breeds like French Bulldogs, English Bulldogs, and other high-risk breeds, they do make it much more daunting to cover because those are the breeds that we know will have problems. We know that. I mean, when I was doing the work in the claims department, I started to look at the genetic conditions. Labradors have 70 congenital hereditary conditions. They don't all show up. But if you get them all, you have a problem. And if your pet is insured, you have to deal with them. So I think there's a place for it. I think we're still in the very infancy of it. But I do think we need to rethink how some of the policies are and try to find more affordable accident injury policies for the average consumer to be covered for the linear foreign body, for the disc, for the jumped off the couch, broke a leg type thing.
Yeah, and if you speak to, I hate to dog on the French Bulldogs because as you know, I love them.
They paid for your hat.
Yeah, they did. They did. If you're making the analogy that pet insurance is similar to car insurance or health insurance or home insurance, then the French Bulldog is the equivalent to the red sports car or the house in the floodplain, right? And so how does the insurance company, and I'm asking, how does the insurance company create models around high risk breeds compared to low risk? Because the Labrador Retriever owner could make the argument that the French Bulldog being the number one breed, I'm paying for that through my insurance. Why am I being penalized for that?
Yeah, I think there are some companies that have gone through the actuarial data and looked at and have breed specific and location specific premiums. Because in St. Louis, your overhead costs are half, maybe not half, but significantly lower than they are in Los Angeles. And so if I'm in Los Angeles, there is an expectation that I'm going to walk in to see a neurologist and my office call is probably going to be $250.
Right.
I don't know what it's going to be in St. Louis. And we probably shouldn't be talking numbers, but anyhow, so you have to build into the premiums that you're paying the breed factors and the demographic factors.
Yeah.
And I think that levels the playing field, which maybe says, okay, if I can't afford the insurance on the Lamborghini, maybe I shouldn't buy the Lamborghini.
Yes. And I think the difference, which continues to surprise me, I was on an ACVIM panel this past month to discuss what we do about the French Bulldog. And we got specifically into the bioethics of it, but also the population demographics of owners. And this, by the way, was one of the most attended sessions at the entire conference, which not only speaks to how common the breed is becoming, but how big of a deal it is to the veterinarians that treat them. And it's an emotional issue as much as a financial issue. The idea that the complications of having the conversations about complications, the time investment, the likelihood of medical challenges and more morbidities that are outside of what you are primarily treating the dog for. So I think that it is a very real issue for veterinarians right now. I was going somewhere else with it, but I did lose my train of thought.
No, well, it'd be interesting to have the pet health insurance company that has a specific focus on maybe French bulldogs and English bulldogs. A brachycephalic. Go ahead.
Oh, I remembered what I was going to say. You were making the comparison to a Lamborghini. Sorry about that. You were making the comparison to the Lamborghini, and what I wanted to say came out of that panel is that most French bulldog owners don't do their research, buy these animals out of passion, and don't know that they're buying the Lamborghini. They think that they're buying French bulldog looks a little bit like a Pinto, so maybe that's what they think they're getting. But it's the lack of education is especially to the public and the lay folk is a big variable in this, because how do you charge more for a breed when people that are insurance for a breed when most people don't even know that that breed is inherently more challenging?
Interesting. You pushed the Pinto button. Isn't the Pinto the car that blew up when it got rear-ended?
I think so. I think so. I could have said something like a jalopy, but yeah.
Or an Edsel, but you're not that
Yeah.
old. Great stuff. Great stuff. So what does 2024, the rest of 2024 and 25 look for you? When's the ribbon cutting for ANC?
We're shooting for October 1st. As you know, whenever you work with builders, you can add a couple weeks and you can add a little bit of money, but October 1st is our goal. And in that interim period, I really hope to lean into sharing with the community what we offer. One of the differences about St. Louis, or two differences that come to mind. One is that I really love the kinship that the veterinarians feel with each other. They see each other as colleagues and friends, not adversaries. So I feel fortunate to join the group again. But also the radius through which Midwestern markets draw is exponentially greater than the coastal ones. You know, in North Carolina, if I go 30 miles north or south, I'm in a separate market with other specialists that are available. In St. Louis, I could make the argument I could have a 240-mile radius. So I'm going to spend a lot of time, hopefully, reaching to veterinarians, specifically primary care veterinarians that have somewhat abandoned advanced care because of the limited access, and let them know that we're there to support them.
Well, if you are not uncomfortable extending up to the University of Illinois, which is about a 3-hour drive, so that makes it about 180 miles. So that's in your 240-mile radius. Heck, you can almost get up to halfway to Chicago in that radius.
You got it.
And obviously you can get all the way to Columbia, Missouri. So you got a pretty good pull from that standpoint. And you're absolutely correct. In California, we don't talk in miles, we talk in minutes.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and freeways are barriers just like rivers and oceans. People
That's
don't
right.
want to go to the other side of the freeway. So I look forward to seeing the pictures, hearing the stories. I guess you're probably not going to be out and about doing too many speaking gigs between now and October, although Kansas City's not far from St. Louis.
Yeah, I'm guilty, like many of us, of having difficulty saying no. And more than that, I draw so much joy from speaking at conferences. It fills my bucket. So I actually am quite busy. In August, I'm teaching a neurosurgical course in Las Vegas for ACVIM for a number of young neurologists that want to learn surgery. And then I'm doing Fetch Kansas City. I'll be speaking there. And then really exciting is the IVEX, is the critical care symposia, is going to be in St. Louis this year. So I'll be speaking there as well.
Very cool. Well, I know IVEX is in San Diego next year, if I'm not incorrect. So I expect to see you before then, but I will see you in Kansas City. We'll see you somewhere on down the road. And don't forget, we can't do neuro without you.
I appreciate that. I'm going to keep that. And thanks for having me on, Peter. I always learn more than I offer, but I was glad to be a part of it.
Fred, thank you so much. Thanks for being a part of this podcast. And thank you for your insights and your vision and your dream. And really, I just want to highlight you as a dreamer for the veterinary profession. And if we can do this with neuro, maybe we can do it with onco. And maybe we can do it with endo, although endo and cardio don't have as many tools as they necessarily need as you do in onco. But maybe we can start to build these facilities, and maybe you'll have students that just don't come from Missouri and Illinois and Iowa State, but maybe you'll pull students from the coasts as well, to fill those classrooms. So I look forward to seeing you through this dream, and hoping to see it be a model for other dreamers that are out there. So thank you, Fred. Thanks for joining us and taking a new look at veterinary neurology, and we appreciate that very much. I also want to take a moment to thank our listeners. If you came hoping to get some business, you got a whole new approach to things today, and I want you to take that to heart. We appreciate each and every one of our listeners. We can't do it without you. If you like our podcast, kindly share it with your colleagues and friends on social media. Also, please don't forget to leave us a review on your favorite podcast platform. Your reviews will help others and doctors and practice owners find us. So until next time, keep striving for excellence. Make a positive impact in the lives of your patients and parents. Keep your feet on the ground. Keep reaching for the stars. Thank you, Casey Kasem. Wishing all of you an amazing week ahead.